Welcome everyone to Prep Expert's new SAT course. This is for the SAT that will be taking place in March 2016 is when it will first be released. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go over the SAT essay. So there's been a lot of talk since the new SAT has been announced a little over a year ago. About the new SAT and how it's changing. And one of the main aspects about how it's changing is the SAT essay. So you've probably heard a lot of things about how the new SAT essay is going to change. You've probably heard that now it's going to be an analysis essay, right? Before it was a persuasive essay where you could write sort of what you felt or what you thought about, and now you're going to be analyzing a piece of text. So I know that might sound intimidating, but it's really not as intimidating as it seems, and we'll dig a little bit more in depth as we go through this course about what exactly writing an analysis essay entails and how to go about that. You've also heard that it's 50 minutes now, so 50 minutes as opposed to 25 minutes. So that sounds like good news, right? But it may or may not be, right? Because the piece of analytical piece that you have to do, the editorial that you have to read or passage you have to read will take you some time, right? So previously you didn't really have to read something in conjunction, and so you had 25 minutes, you had half the time. But even though you had half the time, you didn't have to read anything. So they're giving you double the time, but they expect you to read and analyze a piece of text now. So we'll discuss, is that actually better or worse that you have that much time, but you also have to read more, right? And it's optional. So I'm sure a lot of students and parents were thinking, well, if the SAT essay is optional, I'm just not going to take it. And so that might be true for a small minority of you guys, but for the most part, all of you watching this video course will actually be taking the SAT essay, regardless if it's optional or not, and we'll discuss that in just a few moments as well. But the main thing we want to do over the course of these next few slides is to give you effective strategies. So just like there were effective strategies for the old SAT essay, there's effective strategies for the new SAT essay. And not surprisingly, a lot of them remain the same. It's very similar to how we tackled the SAT essay on the 2400 version of the SAT. And so that's good news for those of you that have spent your time, learning 2400 expert strategies previously. Prep Expert will give you very similar strategies. And so if you're already familiar with our current strategies that were valid for the 2400 exam, picking up these new strategies for the 1600 exam should be no problem at all. All right. So what is the format of the SAT essay? So this table comes straight out of the College Board Test Specifications document. This was an early release document about how the new SAT will look, and so it gives us a little bit of information. So let's dive in. So we already know here it says time allotted that it's going to be 50 minutes, right? So we've got double the time, so it sounds like great news. And then there's going to be a prompt. Yes, we know that. It's going to be passage-based, but they do tell us a little bit more information here that it's going to be between 650 to 750 words. So that's nice. It's a standardized exam, so every exam is going to have relatively the same amount of reading that each student will have to do from exam to exam. It's not like you're going to take an SAT one day, like let's say you take the October SAT, you can't come back and say, well, my SAT passage was super long. It was like 1,000 words, because it probably wasn't. Actually, it definitely wasn't. The College Board has specified here that it's going to be between 650 to 750 words. So the same amount of reading for everyone, and that's not too much. I mean, that's kind of like your typical SAT passage that you would see on a reading section. So it's very similar to what you would see on the SAT reading section. And so a lot of those strategies that we learn in the SAT reading section or that you're going to learn in the SAT reading section are going to become even more relevant now to the SAT essay because now you have to read this passage and understand it and digest its content. So speaking of the content, here it says that the content will always be an argument written for a broad audience. So this is actually a very important sentence here that comes straight from the College Board. The reason it's so important is because A, it has to be written for a broad audience. Now, if you took the 2400 expert course back when the SAT was out of 2400, you would know that, I would always state that the SAT essay would always be about a very general topic, meaning that, they would give you topics previously. I'm talking about the previous SAT essay, like, is creativity good for society? Is it important to rebel against tyranny? Those types of things that are very broad and general. They couldn't really give you specific topics. Like one time actually, the College Board gave a topic about photography for the SAT essay, and they got a load of complaints from parents and students um, because not everyone knows about photography. We're talking about everyone in the world can take this test to go to college in the United States, right? So maybe maybe there's someone in a third world country who doesn't really even know anything about photography, right? So you can't ask about specific things. They're never going to ask you, or previously they would never ask you about the War of 1812 or like Jane Austen's literature, right? However, with this new SAT, they can ask you specifically about the passage, right? So while they while it's going to be broad, it's still going to be specific about that passage. But what they are saying is that it's going to be a broad topic in the passage that um, everyone will have some idea about, right? For a broad audience. It won't necessarily, so it's not going to help you. It really won't help. It'll probably work to your disadvantage actually if you have prior knowledge of the subject in the SAT essay. And so yeah, so it's written for a broad audience, but what's more important in this sentence is that it says that it's arguments, right? So it's always going to be a passage or an editorial or an article that's an argument. So that means the author is always going to be arguing one side of something. They're going to be arguing for a reform of something. They're going to be arguing that society will be better off with A, B, C, whatever it is. And we're going to see a lot of those types of passages as we go through this section. But just keep that in mind that you're always going to be reading an opinionated piece of text, right? So that's going to be key. Text complexity, that's pretty self-explanatory, right? You guys are all grades through 9 through 12, although we do have some younger students. So it's usually going to be at a high school reading level. And I suppose we do have some older students who sometimes take the SAT after high school. So I shouldn't say that you guys are all 9 through 12. Most of you are grades 9 through 12, so it'll be at an appropriate reading level. All right, the next frequently asked SAT essay question is how is it different, right? So I've touched on a few of these points already. So the current version of the SAT essay on the 2400 exam, first of all, it's required, right? So students don't have a choice to take it. You must take it. And it's going to be factored into your SAT writing score out of 800 on on the current version, right? So they take your SAT essay writing score or your essay score and your writing multiple choice score, and they give you a score out of 800. So it's going to be absolutely essential that you take the SAT essay on this current version of the SAT, but not necessarily for the new SAT, because the new SAT, it's optional. So not everyone needs to take it, but I'll go in a little bit more depth in just a couple of slides about why I think everyone probably should take it. And the way that it's scored now is, so you're going to get a SAT essay score, but it's going to be completely separate of your 1600 score. So you're going to get a score of 800 for math and then a score for 800 for reading and writing. So they've combined reading and writing into a total score of 800, right? And then math as 800. And then you're going to get this separate essay score out of 12, and that's going to be separate. and it's not going to factor into your score of 1600. So that's a huge difference. On the SAT, the current SAT, your essay score affects your score out of 2400. On the new SAT, your essay score will not affect your score out of 1600. So I know a lot of you are thinking, well, then maybe it's not that important to do well on the SAT essay. Well, I don't think that's necessarily true. Colleges are still going to look at your SAT essay score, and judge how well of a write or how good of a writer you are, I suppose. Um, and so the new 2400, as you may want to call it, is going to be a 1600 and a perfect score on the essay, which would be a 12, right? Um, and so just keep that in mind. On the current version of the SAT essay, you have to write a persuasive essay. So what is a persuasive essay? A persuasive essay is one where you're trying to convince the reader of your position, right? And that was pretty common, and we had a really great template that we used to persuade our SAT essay readers um, to take our position when we would write out the current version of the SAT essay. On the new SAT essay, it's actually analytical, which means you're not going to be taking a position at all, so it's completely different than the current version of the SAT essay. In this new version, you're just going to be analyzing the piece of text and you're not going to take a position. You're going to be completely objective. Your opinion is really irrelevant. It doesn't matter what you think about the topic. You don't want to mention it, actually. You just want to analyze the piece of text. And we'll talk a little bit more about, how you want to analyze it as we go through this section. But you're just going to be analyzing the text, analyzing, how the author builds the argument, what literary techniques does he use, what the argumentation tactics does he use, etc., or she. The current SAT, I already talked about this. It was 25 minutes. So students would always complain, it's really, really hard to write so much in 25 minutes. And so maybe that's a boon on this new SAT because you've got 50 minutes to write your essay now. So you've got a ton more time. Um, but we'll see. I mean, you do have to analyze that piece of text, right? And you have to analyze it in depth. So that will take some time. So maybe, if that takes you 25 minutes to read the piece of text, then you only have 25 minutes to write left, right? And so that means that you really just don't have any extra time. So we'll see. We'll see in just a second about, how I think you should split your time between reading the text and then writing your essay. Another major difference of the current SAT out of 2400 and the new SAT out of 1600 is that the essay on the current version is the first section. So what I would always tell students is that the essay was the most important section of the SAT. The reason for that on the 2400 version is because it's the first section. So how well you do on the first section is going to really set the tone for how well you do on the rest of the exam. For example, if you're super nervous and frantic and you barely scribble down a few fragments and only half a page to start your 2400 SAT, you're probably going to be super anxious and nervous throughout the rest of the exam, and it's going to set a really bad tone. Versus if you're super confident that you just wrote a full 2-page awesome killer essay, you're probably going to be pretty confident for the rest of the SAT and you're going to do better on the rest of the problems. So that's why I would always say on the current version, on the 2400 version of the SAT, the SAT essay was the most important section. Now they've actually flipped the script and they've made the SAT essay the last section. And so that does a few things. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the most important section anymore, but I still think it's very, very important because how you end the SAT essay is also going to affect your psyche for the next few days, but maybe not necessarily for the exam. But it's also important to finish strong. And then the other thing is your SAT essay is going to be a complete other score that colleges are going to see next to your 1600 score, right? They're going to see a score out of 800 for your math, a score out of 800 for your writing and reading, and then they're going to see a score out of 800 for your essay, or not score out of 800, score out of 12 for your essay, right? So, I mean, it's pretty important to do well and not get like, a 3 or something like that, because colleges are going to see that, and even if you scored phenomenally on the 1600 part, if you bomb the essay, it's not going to look very good. And I just put 5 stars next to the new SAT essay, and because I actually think this new SAT essay is better, and I'll go into why in just a second, versus the new old SAT essay out of 2400 is had some issues with it, and I don't think that it was as easy to prepare for, but I think this one is actually much easier to prepare for. So how is it scored? All right. So the first thing that they're going to look for when you're scoring your SAT essay is your writing ability. So this is pretty much, are you using correct grammar? Do you have an introduction? Do you have a conclusion? Are you connecting ideas? Are you using transitions? Do you have a thesis? Do you have a plan for your essay? It's really the structure of how you write, right? A lot of this is basically what a lot of English teachers grade on, right? Is just the actual ability to write regardless of your content, right? So the other thing they're going to grade you on is they're going to give you a score from 1 through 4 on your reading ability. So what does this mean? This means, did you actually comprehend the passage? Did you understand what the author's argument is? If you don't understand what the author's argument is in the passage, it's going to be really hard to score well on this, on the entire SAT essay, but especially on this reading sub-score of your SAT essay, right? So that's why, again, I'm going to stress the importance of a lot of our strategies from the SAT reading section for this new SAT are going to be super important on the SAT essay section, because you do have a passage that you need to thoroughly understand. I would argue that you actually need to understand the SAT essay passage more in depth than any other passage on the SAT, because you're writing a full, 2-page essay on it. And that's not something you have to do for the rest of the passages, right? So it's super important to understand this particular passage especially. The last bucket that they're going to grade you on is analysis. So how well did you analyze the author's argument? So the author is going to have some argument, some thesis that they're going to be trying to prove, or at least support in their article. And you want to see, they want to know, how well did you analyze how they built that argument? What literary devices did the author use? What argumentative tactics do they use? How was their diction? Did you look at that? Did you look at how it contributed to their overall argument? Are you analyzing how they built their argument? Or are you just summarizing what the text said? So I already know that even though, the new SAT as of this recording is not out yet, I already know a ton of students are just going to be rehashing exactly, what is in the text. Not you, of course, because you guys are prep expert students. So I'm going to show you how not to just summarize the text, but really analyze it and build your argument. So as you can see, you get 3 scores for writing, reading, and analysis of your essay. So you'll get from 1 through 4, 1 through 4, 1 through 4 on each one. So the essay score can go anywhere from 3 to 12 with a maximum score of 12. And so that's what we're going to be aiming for our students here at Prep Expert is to get that 12. And the nice thing is a lot of this is already built into many of our strategies. You'll see that in our templates and our strategies. The writing structure is already built in for you. How to read the text and really understand it is built into the strategies, and how to analyze it is really, really built into the strategies. So, we've got this covered for you guys, so you don't have to worry. All you really have to do is watch, listen, practice, and you'll be fine. But again, what's most important, and I talked about this, in our previous course for the current version of the 2400 SAT, is the circumstances under which your SAT essay is graded. So the College Board hires, professionals, but a lot of them are high school English teachers, right? So high school English teachers are great at, reading essays and scoring your essays and all that. But you have to understand that this is different than your high school English exam. than a typical high school English exam. In a typical high school English exam, your English teacher can spend hours poring over your essay for, subtle insights that you made and, great, connections that you made and all these things. But for a standardized exam like the SAT essay, you have to remember these graders are going to be grading thousands of these essays. And so if you've got thousands of essays to grade, you're not going to have a lot of time to spend really, diving deep into every single one. Not to mention, they're all going to be on the exact same passage, so it's going to get really boring and repetitive. So, I mean, let's say that your SAT essay grader is spending 2 to 3 minutes on your SAT essay. That's not a whole lot of time, right? So that's why it's so important for us to understand that, because then we know that we have to give them quick clues as to show them that we are a smart high school or we're smart high school students who really know what we're talking about, and that we deserve a high SAT essay grade. And we have to do that quickly, right? Because they only have 2 to 3 minutes. And so a lot of our strategies are focused on what are the tangible ways we can show the SAT essay grader that, we deserve a 12 on the SAT essay. So just keep in mind the way that your SAT essay is graded. It's not going to be graded like your high school English teacher, especially, really good high school English teachers will spend hours grading essays. Not one essay, but, they'll spend multiple hours just grading, even like 10 essays, because they really want to help the student improve the argument and all that. But I mean, what these high school English teachers with the SAT essay do is, they really have a checklist as from 1 through 4 for your writing ability, your reading ability, and your analysis ability, right? Like they're literally just going through in their mind, is this student able to write on a 1 through 4 scale? Is this student able to read on a 1 through 4 scale? And is this student able to analyze on a 1 through 4 scale? And so we just have to keep that in mind when we think about how the SAT essay is scored. All right. Is it harder? So that's a good question. So a lot of people are wondering, is the SAT in general harder? And I think you guys know my opinion is that the new SAT is going to be an easier version of SAT, so that's great news. But is the SAT essay going to be harder? Because it sounds harder, right? It sounds like you've got extra time, that's good, but at the same time, you've got a lot more to do. You've got to analyze a text, and on the current version of the SAT, what we would tell students to do, and some of you that have taken the 2400 version of the course know, is that we would prepare material ahead of time. So we would have students come in with literature examples, current event examples, and historical examples to use as their evidence for the SAT essay. And the reason we could do that is because SAT essay topics used to be very general, as I stated before, and you could write, and you can usually find some aspect from your examples that you've prepared ahead of time to apply to SAT essay topics on the 2400 version of the exam. But you can't do that anymore on the new SAT essay, right? This time they're going to give you a specific article. So there's no way you can know how to, or there's no way you can prepare your essay or, the material that you're going to write ahead of time, right? Not exactly. You can actually prepare a lot of what you're going to write ahead of time, and a lot of the strategies are going to be focused on how are we going to prepare the SAT essay before we ever see it, just like we would in the 2400 exam. And what we found here at Prep Expert is that it's actually much easier to prepare your essay ahead of time for this type of essay, and so that's great news for you guys. So I actually think the SAT essay is much easier on this new SAT. So the College Board specifically states in their document of test specifications for the new test that the prompts on the SAT essay are going to be largely the same. So if the prompts are largely the same, that means the responses can be largely the same, right? You respond to a prompt. If the prompt is the same or largely the same, your response is going to be very similar every time as well. So that's great, great news for you guys. It's super formulaic as to how we put together the SAT essay. Now, I know formulaic writing is usually seen as a bad thing, but when it comes to SAT essay, I think it's a great thing. I think it's great that you don't have to spend, or waste time during the SAT essay thinking of what you're going to write because you already know what you're going to write. And it's actually become more formulaic now that, you've got very common SAT essay prompts. Even though you don't know what the prompt's going to be, you know how it's going to be structured and how the author will speak in that prompt. So it's still very, very formulaic, and I'll show that's the point of all these essay strategies is to show how to create not only a formulaic SAT essay, but a very powerful formulaic SAT essay, right? Like one that just dominates and rocks. And so that's what we're going to show you in this course. The other thing is the time. I actually think the time is a huge advantage. So 650 to 750 words shouldn't take you that long to read. If you were just reading it in a newspaper article or magazine article or online, that article would take you around 5 minutes to read, probably less time. But I actually think you should spend about 15 minutes reading it. The reason I'm saying you should spend more time than just 5 minutes is because you're going to need to analyze main ideas. You're going to need to analyze argument tools and all that. But I'm going to show you how to do all that. But I mean, that's going to take about 15 minutes of your time. So I think that the split of time that you should take for the SAT essay should be about 15 minutes reading the text and analyzing it, and then 35 minutes composing your essay. But that's a huge advantage, right? Because previously you had 25 minutes to write a two-page essay. Now you have 35 minutes to write a two-page essay. So you've got all this extra time and all this extra luxury basically to create an even better essay. So that makes the new SAT essay even easier than the current one, right? So all in all, the new SAT essay is easier, and we're going to show you why. So should I take the SAT essay? So again, it's optional, right? So do you need to take it or not? Well, I actually think that about 10% of you don't need to take the SAT essay. However, 90% of you should take the SAT essay. The reason I say that is because of evidence from the ACT. So the ACT has been optional. The essay portion of the ACT has been optional for a long time. However, most competitive universities still require the ACT with the essay section or the writing section when you submit your score. So like, a university like Harvard, right, would say, you need to submit your SAT score and or your ACT score with writing. So what they're probably going to do is they're going to require your SAT score with writing, with the essay, right? And so most competitive universities will still require that essay portion of the SAT, just like they've been requiring the essay portion of the ACT, even though it's been optional. So I think that 90%, probably more than that, of prep expert students are applying to competitive universities. Now, it doesn't have to be Harvard competitive. I mean, most universities that are in the top, 50 U.S. News universities are going to require, the SAT essay. So if you're applying to a top 50 school, my guess is they're going to require the essay. Now, that's my guess. I don't know every single university that you'll eventually be applying to. But if you know that list, I would just check with every school. And so for the 5 or 10% of you that are not applying or that are applying to universities that don't require the essay, then you can skip the rest of this video part for the SAT essay because you won't need to take it. But again, that's a very small percentage because most prep expert students are very enterprising when it comes to college, and so most of you will be taking the SAT essay because the colleges are going to require it. And if you're not sure of what colleges you're going to be applying to, then take the SAT essay because the last thing you want to happen is you didn't take the SAT essay and then a college that you are applying to requires it, right? Because then you might have to take the SAT all over again just for the SAT, just so you can apply to that one university. So I don't want that to happen to you. So what all of you should do is just take the SAT, except for maybe the 5 to 10% of you that 100% know that the university that you're applying to slash going to does not require the SAT. Okay, so that covers the frequently asked SAT essay questions in an introduction, short introduction to the SAT essay. And so next we're going to soon dive into the strategies. All right, so I'll see you guys in a bit.